I'm Sally Pius. I'm New Mexico Wild staff attorney, and I'm here with my friend and colleague.
Yeah, Bjorn Fredrickson. I'm the conservation director at New Mexico Wild. We wanted to join up today to talk about the Roadless Rule.
So the Roadless Rule. All right. So Bjorn, can you quickly summarize what is the Roadless Rule?
Yeah, the Roadless Rule is essentially legal guidance for the Forest Service established in 2001 that protects about 59 million acres of land nationally, and that's 1.6 million acres here in New Mexico, of areas that are wild and roadless primarily. And it requires that the Forest Service manage these lands in a way that retains their roadless characteristics, no more road building, and has prohibition on cutting trees, and particularly prohibits commercial timber cutting, with some exceptions for restoration work related to wildfire risk reduction. So they can do some thinning, for example, fuels reduction, or there can be some management of vegetation, tree cutting for the purposes of improving habitat for threatened, endangered, sensitive species. Is kind of the gist of what the Roadless Rule is and what it does.
Oh, and I think a lot of people have probably never heard of the Roadless Rule, and yet I think a lot of people go to roadless areas and really care about these parts of our national forests. They provide a lot of really important benefits to Americans. They're some of our largest intact natural expanses of National Forest Service land, and these are places that are super critical for some of our resources. So, for example, these areas tend to have intact air, water, and soil, which is kind of the basis of all of nature that we need as people and that non-human species need as well. The roadless areas are very important for drinking water supply and for watershed protection. Out here in the West, 33% of our water comes out of our national forests. And so these roadless areas of our forests are really important for our limited and critical drinking water supply here in New Mexico. Another thing that they do is provide excellent habitat for species. So our wildlife, our fish and our game populations really rely on it. A lot of our endangered and threatened and imperiled species can be found and really have strongholds in these areas. So super important for wildlife. And our roadless areas are critical for outdoor recreation. They're areas where people go for hiking and camping, hunting and fishing, paddling and rock climbing and mountain biking. So they're areas that are actually really important to a lot of New Mexicans and our families, places where we go to spend our free time and places that we rely on for a lot of the things that we need in everyday life.
Yeah, I would say too that they're really important for the economy. So you talked about all the great recreation opportunities in roadless areas. So that is a huge economic driver in New Mexico, with the state investing in promoting the outdoor recreation economy. Roads also are expensive, and so the Forest Service is a federal agency. There are about 380,000 miles of roads under National Forest management across the country. I mean, that's equivalent to like 8 times the size of the interstate highway system. Which you think about that, that's huge. That's a crazy number. And so the Forest Service is spending taxpayer dollars to try to maintain these roads. Their functional budget for that work has been decreasing over the years. The roads are not being maintained well. And so there's an economic argument really in favor of roadless areas, in the sense that more roads is more money that the taxpayers are not able to cough up for the Forest Service anymore. The budget's decreasing, like I said. So that's a really, I think the economic benefit of roadless areas is another important one. And then I think benefits around wildfires is something that is confusing, and I think that is being used right now to undermine public confidence and support of roadless areas. People cause most wildfires nationally. That could be an abandoned campfire, that could be a cigarette butt thrown out the window, other things, but something like 85% of wildfires are caused by people. Forest Service and federal data on wildfires also shows that fires are much more likely to occur in the proximity of roads, in close proximity to roads. And so roadless areas have maybe a quarter of the fire starts as compared to areas close to roads. And so they're beneficial in the sense of fewer fires starting where it's a little harder to get to.
And One of the reasons we're talking about the roadless rule today is that right now the roadless rule is under a pretty big threat. In fact, the U.S. Department of Agriculture announced back in June that they're planning to repeal it altogether. And this announcement was actually made in Santa Fe, New Mexico, during a public lands rally that we were having as part of the Western Governors Association. The department has said that they're going to repeal it because it's preventing us from wildfire mitigation, and also because it's preventing us from using our timber resources. This is coming at a time when the Trump administration has ordered the U.S. Forest Service to increase the amount of commercial timber of logging in our forests by 25% on a very short timeline. And so it's kind of this combination of less folks working for the Forest Service, more work for them to do in trying to get out timber contracts. And as part of it, they're just getting rid of this protection that's been in place for a long time. But I think the roadless areas were actually very popular when they were established. Bjorn, you want to talk a little bit about the process through which they put this thing in place?
And so the rule was put in place under the Clinton administration in 2001, and that included extensive community and public outreach. And so they did more than 600 public meetings nationally, really thorough work at hearing people, listening to people. They collected something like 1.6 million comments in that process, and the vast majority of which were in favor of the rule. And so that's in stark contrast to what's going on today, which is this kind of fly-by-night, we're going to just repeal the rule. It was announced as if it was done. They're doing a token, 2-week-long comment period. And so it feels like it's really in the interest of the timber industry. It feels disrespectful to people and communities that care about our public lands and our forests. And I think it's also disingenuous in the sense that, as I mentioned earlier, the Forest Service is allowed to do wildfire mitigation work in roadless areas. More fires start in roaded areas, and so they're using this wildfire emergency, as they're calling it, as justification, almost inverse of reality, to sort of support this notion that the rule needs to be rescinded.
Yeah, and we do expect that there is going to be some public process, although they're not following a good process, and it's just really bad to see the kinds of shortcuts and corner cutting that they're doing in terms of public outreach and stakeholder engagement around this repeal. But we are anticipating a public comment period is about to happen, or could be happening by the time you hear this podcast. During that 14-day comment period, there will be an opportunity for people to share why roadless areas are important to them. And so we really encourage people. We've put together some really helpful interactive maps. You can go to these maps and look and see in a national forest near you, where have you been? Maybe you recreate up outside of Santa Fe in an inventoried roadless area. Maybe you go down to the Gila National Forest and enjoy the roadless areas down there near our first wilderness areas. Think about your activities that you like to do there. Tell the agency how it's going to affect your life and your drinking water supply, or your ability to go out for some of our world-class hunting and fishing opportunities that we have here in New Mexico. I think the more that people are able to share their personal stories about why these places matter to them, the more pressure we're going to be able to put on the agency and convince them, hopefully, to reconsider this bad proposal.
Yeah, I think the gist is people paying attention, speaking their voices. I think that will counter this idea that they're trying to kind of slip this under the radar. And so if we're able to speak up loudly and together, and again, why these specific places matter, I think it'll be really powerful in defending these last sort of lingering, most wild places that we have in our national forests.